Well, you were warned not to park there. This story happened about 15 years ago, give or take. At the time, I worked for a small industrial railroad in my city that served about 20 different industries along the docks. To get to the docks, from the yard where I would pick up the inbound deliveries to the industries, cars, we had a mile of street trackage that ran right down the middle of a small street. Numerous bars lined the street on one side, with the river on the other side. Because of city regulations, we were only allowed to operate along that span of track between specific hours. Typically, 11 at night, to about 5 in the morning. However, since the bars were open at that time, it also meant that we had to trundle along at a crawl, usually walking pace, or just about that, and keep the locomotive on the front end of the movement. Every night I went down that street, there would typically be 2 or 3 people who had parked too close to the tracks, prompting me to have to get people to move their cars. It wasn't a major problem, just an annoyance. Except for one guy. It seemed that every single night, I would have to stop about halfway down because this guy would always park his truck at an angle in the street, as opposed to parallel parking. There were some angle parking spaces, but they were further down where there wasn't rails in the road. Every single night, I'd have to head into the bar this guy owned and bug the guy to get him to move the truck. Most of the time, it'd take him a good 30 minutes to an hour to drag himself out and move the thing. This meant, of course, I was losing time that I needed to get my job done. After months of this, I finally decided that I had enough, so I decided to have the guy towed. Yeah. That didn't work out as well as I hoped. Turned out that the guy also had some job with the city, or the mayor's office, or some friend in either. So, no one would dare come out and tow his truck. I think I waited there a good hour before he eventually came out and moved it, even having the gall to flip me the bird as he left. At that point, I decided that not only was I totally done with the guy, but if the chance arose, I was going to teach him a lesson he wouldn't soon forget. Nothing physical per se, just a hard-learned lesson. Couple days later, I found myself heading down the track with half a dozen heavy cars with machinery bound for the docks. As I rounded the curve and neared the place where that guy always parked, I gently applied the independent brakes on the locomotive. This would slow the heavy train, but wasn't enough to stop it outright. At least, not quickly. I waited until the very last minute, laying on the horn and applying the full brakes, bringing everything to a screeching halt in the middle of the street. As I felt the brakes begin to hold, there was this loud thunk and screeching and tearing of metal as the train simply punted the truck out of the way, tearing the bed clean off it in the process. This did not go unnoticed, as a crowd had started to gather out front of the bar when they heard the train coming. I stay in the cab, calling back to dispatch and inform them that I'd struck a parked car, and they needed to get the police and a tow truck out to my location. All the while, I could hear this guy screaming, heard him over the sound of the locomotive no less, at the top of his lungs about how he was going to have me thrown in jail, sue the company, and all manner of things. Locking the doors, I opted to just wait in the cab for the boys in blue to arrive. Eventually, they pop around and start taking statements. I explain the problem, noting that I couldn't, well, I could have, but it wouldn't have been a good idea, simply slam on the brakes due to the cargo I was carrying, and that the only reason I hit the truck was because it was improperly parked. I added that the gentleman had been warned in the past that something like this could happen, and had ignored the warnings. The man, for his part, was simply livid, hopping around, yelling at me, yelling at the cops, and just beside himself. In the end, he was ticketed for his bad parking, obstructing the passage of a train, and his truck was totaled, and he ended up on the hook for paying for it. Truck was brand new, and not yet paid off, or so I was told. It took about 2 hours to clean up the mess, and I was, per company rules, suspended for a week during the company investigation. But honestly, it was worth it. Didn't have any problems with him from that point forward either. Now to the comments. Well-deserved revenge. I only wish I could have seen it. Well done. Especially nice when someone who thinks they're untouchable gets touched by the frisky hands of justice. Okay sweetie, show us on the teddy where justice touched you. Read this in Deadpool's voice as well. Were you suspended with or without pay? OP replied, with union job. A week paid vacation without having to use any personal or sick days, and you get to put an asshole in his place by destroying his truck. Awesome. What is it with people and having no respect for large locomotives? Not right, you had to go to such lengths, but in the end, it worked out well. I know you probably don't want to put it too many details. But what was it like? What kind of locomotive did you drive? I still have a thing for trains, lol. OP replied. MP15 It had its moments. I tended to keep the cab end facing the dock for visibility. That night though, I put the nose forward. I have some other stories of having fun with the bar patrons, like creeping along at a crawl and waiting till I was just passing a couple who were making out along the river, and then laying on the horn to watch them jump. Don't answer if you don't want. But was this the TASD? Setup sounds somewhat similar to them, and the MP15 made me think it for sure. I've been down there and rode with a crew. Good manager there. Also glad this idiot got what he deserved. He was fouling the track, which is trespassing on our property, so I'm glad he got cited for it. You really railed him good. Yeah, that guy was definitely on track for this to happen. Beautifully engineered and tied together. I like how you not only got revenge, you also got off work for a week. I can't imagine the level of ego required to park your car over an actual ducking train track and then have the nerve to think the train needs to wait for you. Perhaps he had played too much SimCity 3000. I remember laughing my ass off when I discovered that the traffic AI in that game had a bug wherein the trains would stop to let the cars go by. I guess you could say that this was training him? Really surprised you lasted a few months of this guy doing that to you. I wouldn't have made it a week. If it was a new car, he probably had gap insurance. But I'll secretly hope he didn't. I am pretty sure most insurance policies do not pay out for any illegal acts, illegal parking, or car driven during the commission of a crime, fleeing from police or hit and run, etc. Insurance won't pay for criminal acts. Not everything that is illegal is criminal. Speeding, illegal parking are illegal, but they aren't a criminal offense. You trained him to park better, so in the end he doesn't go off the rails for nothing. He chewed something too big for his mouth. Now he'll be chugging to the bar on foot. Okay, I'm done. Okay, I'm done. Don't lose your train of thought, you were on a roll there. Sorry, I had to conduct to my workplace. Almost hit a caboose on my way there. Sadly, I can't think of any other train pun right now. I guess you could say I hit a cowplow. Really wish people would place do not duck with trains higher up in their priority list. Nice to see this subreddit going back to its roots. This is a good one. Friendly reminder to anyone reading this, a train will usually weigh in around times the weight of your car or truck. This means the train will win, and will only technically notice the existence of your car or truck, in that the driver may hear the impact and the train may require a bit of a polish and a touch up on the paint. Yes times? Huh? When asked how much something is, if the answer is way in excess of what's necessary, but you can't be bothered to Google exact numbers, the answer is yes. In this case, locomotives can be around 22 tons, give or take 10 or so. Specific numbers are hard. Lowest I found was 7 tons. That's the locomotive alone, none of the cars. And of course, actual mass depends on how many cars and how full they are and what they're full of. But generally speaking, a normal pickup truck will not crack half of the mass of the locomotive alone. Therefore, yes times. Should have filed a claim with his insurance for your lost wages from that week's suspension. It was a paid suspension. This was a train wreck of a story. I couldn't turn away. I'm curious about some things. Why were the cops so corrupt they wouldn't order the towing of an improperly parked vehicle? But they were cool giving the guy a ticket after the fact. Also, if the truck wasn't paid off, he almost certainly wouldn't have paid out of pocket for this. Financing contracts usually require the borrower buy comprehensive insurance. Do you really know for sure he paid for the damage? Cops never came to tow him is how I understood it. Can't give a ticket for what you don't see. OP replied. Good ole boy culture. He knew someone in power who would get him out of trouble, far as I knew.